Hello and welcome to FDS. My name is Nate and I'm your host. Which should you buy? The Gamegenic Dungeon 1100 Plus or the Ultimate Guard Omnihive 1000 Plus? I'm going to go over some of the details of the Dungeon 1100 Plus from Gamegenic since I finally was able to get my hands on one. And since I did a video on the Omnihive a couple of weeks ago, I thought I would compare them on a couple of different categories. So first off, the Dungeon comes in two colors, Midnight Gray and Black. Its outer skin is a nexofiber and inside it has a microfiber. The Gamegenic website does say that it can hold 1100 double-sleeved cards, hence the name Dungeon 1100 Plus. It has a completely removable lid with magnetic latches that fit into these little divots that make it that this lid isn't coming loose unless you want it to. And that's pretty much it. It's a box. It's a good box, I think. Now let's compare. And here they are. They're big. Both of them are big. The first comparison I wanted to make between them is the perception of their size. The Omnihive seems larger, and I think that's just because it's wider by a pretty good margin, while the Dungeon is taller. The length of the boxes actually are the same, essentially. The Dungeon is about a millimeter longer on the external, so they essentially are the same in terms of length. On the inside, though, I do think the Dungeon has a little bit more space on the inside, and I'll get to why later. Now, I'm not saying the fact that the Omnihive looks bigger is better or worse. I'm just bringing it up because that's my perception. It just feels and looks bigger. The next category I wanted to talk about was the feel. Now, we're pitting the nexofiber versus the Xena skin again. And I've mentioned in previous videos that I just don't like the nexofiber. I'm sorry. I like the Xena skin. I don't like the nexofiber. I recognize, and I want to be very clear on this, that this is a personal opinion. I'm not saying that the nexofiber isn't as good as the Xena skin. Really, it comes down to feel. The nexofiber, when I touch it, I run my hand along it. To me, it's like the same thing as nails on the chalkboard. It just grates on me for some reason. I don't know why, and that's a personal opinion of mine. I like the Xena skin. I like the pebbling on the box. It feels sturdy and strong. One thing I will say that I don't like about the nexofiber versus the Xena skin is the nexofiber can get marked up fairly easily. Next, I want to talk about the build quality. I noticed when I was looking at this that the Dungeon flexes. It flexes fairly easily. It racks, I think is another way to put this. And this centerpiece, it feels more flimsy to me. It also feels, when I hold it, that the walls, both the center wall and the side walls, are thinner compared to the Omnihive, and that would make sense with the flexing that I'm seeing here. I've also noticed that the centerpiece is attached to the box only at the edges in the middle, and there's little gaps here, and I think that's contributing to its wiggle. That being said, the lid is pretty sturdy. The lid feels much sturdier even than the box itself. It feels thicker, and even the hinges feel pretty sturdy. So I think the lid is excellently built. I just wish they had done that with the box itself. Now, to be completely fair, the Ultimate Guard does shift a little as well. I don't feel it shifts as much as the Dungeon does, but it does shift. The center wall doesn't move nearly as much. I'm putting actually a lot more pressure on this to get this to wiggle, and it's only wiggling here at the top because it is attached to the bottom across the entire length of the box. So I think that's another reason why this isn't flexing as much. The side walls flex here a little bit. It doesn't feel as much of a flex as the Dungeon. Also, the Omnihive feels like it's stronger, like the walls are thicker. What does that mean for long-term use? I frankly can't say because I haven't had these long-term, but I do think they're both well made. I just think that the Omnihive is using a little bit more material. Now that brings me to the function. And before I get into what can fit in these things, I did want to talk about a few differences between the boxes. The first being the lid. When I did the video for the Omnihive, I lamented the fact that Ultimate Guard did not create this box with a completely removable lid. A commenter noted that Ultimate Guard can't do a completely removable lid, at least in the way Gamegenic does, because Gamegenic has a patent on that style of lid. Thank you for that information. I do appreciate it. That being said, here is the Smart Hive. The Smart Hive has a completely removable lid in a different way. The lid essentially wraps around the entire box. I wish they could have come up with something similar for this. Maybe not exact, because I recognize that having the lid wrap around this entire box and this being completely full and trying to remove the lid from around the entire box might be a little clumsy and hard to do. So it would have been nice if they had tried to come up with another solution, but we have what we have. This has an attached lid and the dungeon has its completely removable lid. I think this is definitely a win for the dungeon because the dungeon's lid can be completely removed and set to the side and you don't have to worry about it. Whereas with the Omnihive, you always have to be careful where you place it and where you lift the lid off of because whatever's behind it is getting hit by that lid. The other difference is the drawers. The dungeon doesn't have any. The Omnihive does. And not only does the Omnihive have the drawers, but also the drawers can hold cards, which I think is great. Also, the fact that the drawers are completely removable and can be set in the box in multiple different ways and positions, it's just an excellent mark for customizability. So this is definitely a win for the Omnihive. Now, let's talk about what these things can hold. Now, talking about the drawers, I got rid of them. I'm not including them in the testing because I wanted to give the Omnihive the maximum capacity for comparison to the dungeon. There is a key difference between the two boxes, and it's why the Omnihive is wider and the dungeon is taller. The Omnihive, you have to put the cards in sideways, so you put the cards and decks in on their side, where with the dungeon, you put them in up and down, standing. That is a key difference between the two, so just be aware of that going into this comparison. The Omnihive can hold 10 Boulder 100 pluses. The dungeon can hold the same. It can hold the same amount. 10 Boulder 100 pluses. Now the Omnihive, it can hold 12 Boulder 80 pluses. And the dungeon holds 12 as well. Yeah. Oh, but we have Cubamajigs. I tested Cubamajigs. The Omnihive can hold 56 Cubamajigs. And so can the dungeon. It can hold 56 Cubamajigs. And finally, the thing that took me the longest to record is unsleeved cards. I went into my land station and my token station and pulled out as many unsleeved cards as I could find and shoved them in these boxes. And the Omnihive can hold a total of 2,349 cards, which is actually almost 150 more than what the Ultimate Guard website says it can hold for unsleeved cards. And so can the dungeon. The dungeon holds 2,349 cards, and to the dungeon's credit, it probably could fit more. I noticed that I would have been able to fit more cards in there, but I was so worried that I would mess up the count that I just kind of kept it the same. And as you can see here in the video, there's more space in the dungeon versus the Omnihive with unsleeved cards. If I were to venture a guess, you probably could fit 50 to 100 more cards in the dungeon. Basically, the dungeon wins in terms of unsleeved cards, or really loose cards in general. I would imagine that it can hold more loose cards compared to the Omnihive. Now, in terms of deck boxes, I think they're always going to be a tie in that regard, just because, as you can see here, there's just the spacing and such. It would surprise me if there was a scenario where you could fit in an extra deck box of a certain type of deck box in a dungeon versus an Omnihive, considering the difference is so small. Also note that it can fit prisms as well, just like the Omnihive. The Omnihive and the dungeon can both fit prisms, which is awesome. Now, which one do I recommend? Both. They both are excellent boxes that get the job done. Personally, I like the Omnihive more because of the versatility of the drawers, but that doesn't mean that I might not pick up another dungeon if I need one, because that removable lid is a really nice feature. Another point to make is that on average, the Omnihive is $20 to $30 more than the dungeon. So the dungeon is cheaper. So if you're looking for a budget option for your cube or for a larger deck box storage, then you may want to go with the dungeon. If you're looking for something that's a little bit more strong, a little bit more versatile, then you may want to go with the Omnihive. It's entirely up to you. And also what's up to you is clicking on that. This show is part of the CIP network, inspiring creativity, one episode at a time.